one thing that is sure is that, the Sudasa's lineage or Bharata's lineage, as we talk. Instead of saying Sudasa's lineage, it should be King Bharata's lineage. King Bharata is about 18 generations above Sudas. King Bharata's lineage, they insisted on Vedic values and Vedic beliefs, and they wanted to establish the Vedas. Okay. So obviously what it means is probably the other people were not as keen on the Vedic principles and the Aryan principles. If you follow this through, it comes down to your Mahabharata war. The Kuru is actually a descendant of Sudas. And then the kingdom starts, and then you get this division between two cousins and the Pandavas and Kauravas and battle. And again, the battle again in Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita and why is there a war between cousins, because they're all blood brothers. Really, they shouldn't be fighting each other. But Krishna explains why this fighting is done because of dharma. All right. So this follows through, and I think he probably says it better to persist for a period of time, and why it persisted. And maybe because of that, I think we have Hinduism from what it is now. Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this hour of discussion on what little I know about Dashrajna as an eventful turning point in history of India. Most people, as soon as you mention the name Dashrajna, will turn around and say, what? Nobody has ever heard of this title, Dashrajna. Actually, one or two people stood up in my talks and said, is it a man, or is it a king, or is it something else? So I had to actually sit down and describe in a little bit of details. So what exactly is it? It is an epic battle described, as Tanya just now said, in Book 7. Most of it is actually in the hymn 18 of the Book 7, but it gets mentioned in other parts of the same book, and also in Book 3 and Book 6 to some extent. And it is a battle between extremely powerful kings and two of the most powerful sages of the whole entire Vedic scripture. The battle itself is full of intrigue, the rivalry between the sages and kings, and a desire of dominance. Dominance in form of possession and dominance of dharma. And finally, dharma wins, as you will find out later on. This may be the turning point in the entire ancient history of India. I'll come to that a little bit later on. And I also think that this is a prelude to the great epics to come, the great Ramayana, Mahabharata, in probably a couple of hundred years after that. And this battle, unlike either Ramayan's war or Mahabharata, went on for many years. In Mahabharata, we know it only took a few days. And Ramayana, nobody knows, probably again a few days. But this battle went on for a couple of years, and it was fought on two different fronts. One in the west on the banks of River Parushni, or River Ravi as it's called now, and the other one on River Yamuna on the east. The protagonist of the battle is King Sudas. He's a descendant of Puru. I'll come to that in a little bit more detail much later. And a confederation of 10 plus kings. Those days, not all of them are kings. Some of them are tribal chiefs, and some of them kings, some of them are emperors. I'll come to that when I talk about a little bit about Rig Veda as such. And most of them, the enemies, were actually Aryans. People think that the battle probably was between the Aryans and the Dasas or Dasyus or somebody else from outside, but actually this was a battle among cousins. Mahabharata, most of you know the story of Mahabharata, is the battle between the two cousins. Is exactly the same here. And same in Ramayana, in Rama and Ravan. Ravan, though he's mounted as Dhanava Asura, he was a Brahmin. So he was one of the Aryans who fought each other. So it's nothing different. But where it started starts long time ago. And I'll come to that a little bit later. And where did it take place? It took place on the east, or the Yamuna banks. I don't know whether I can see people here. This is Surasena, that's the Yamuna here. And this is Drishadvati, and this is River Ravi. It's called Iravati in this one. But as I said, most of the battle took place on the two fronts. One on the River Yamuna, that's River Yamuna, and this is River Ganga, you can see. That Drishadvati, and that is Saraswati, and I'll come to that a little bit later on. That is the River Ravi, where in Madra, that's probably Harappa. And so the battle took place somewhere here on the east, and then somewhere here on the western front. Okay, now this is what it looks like now, River Ravi, and this is River Yamuna. This is what it looks like now, but it may not be the exact place where the battle took place. Now we have to understand the battle, we have to go back in time. In time means all the way to Manu. We have heard of Manu. Manu, as we know, is not a single person. There were several. And some of the texts tell me that there are 14 Manus, and we are in the 7th Manvantara at the moment. This is Vayavasvata Manu. And nobody knows exactly what period it is. And the Puranas tell that, Brahma created Marichi, yeah, and whose son was Kashyapa. So according to our scriptures, we are all children of Rishi Kashyapa. We actually consider Kashyapa as the progenitor of all human beings across the globe. Vayavasvata Manu was grandson of sage Kashyapa, and he is considered the ruler of Dravida kingdom. And again, the place of the Dravida kingdom is not known. And I don't want to get into this conflict of Dravidians and Aryans, but there is no such thing as a Dravidians and Aryans. That's not the point. The point is there was a Dravida king, and Manu was the ruler of Dravida king. And we have heard of the Matsya and the great flood, and Vishnu coming in the form of a fish, try to help Manu. And when the flood comes, he is taken up to the north, to the Mount Meru, and the ship lands there. And that's where the colonization north started. That's when the Gangetic Plains, Saraswati Plains started being colonized. So Vayavasvata Manu had 10 children. Out of the 10, the 2 of them are important to our story. One is Ila, and the other one who started the lunar dynasty. And the second one is Ikshvaku, who started the solar dynasty from which Sri Rama comes. Ila, then further generations go on till we get Nahusha and Yayati. Yayati is Nahusha's grandson. Yayati marries Devyani. Devyani is daughter of Muni, Shukra Muni, one of the greatest Munis of the Vedic period. He was the priest of Asuras. You see, in those days, Asura was not a bad being. Asuras were the same as gods. They were all powerful, and they followed the Arya Dharma. And so he was an Asura king, and Shukra was his priest. And Devyani was Shukra's daughter. And he also married Sharmishta. There is a bit of a tussle between Devyani and Sharmishta, and she takes Sharmishta as a maidservant, and she happens to be an Asura daughter. She's a daughter of the Vrishaparvan, who is an Asura king. Now this is where the problem starts. Devyani gets 2 children, Yadu and Turvasa, whereas Sharmishta gets 3 children, Druhyu, Anu, and Puru. Puru is the youngest. And Yayati, being what he is sort of a bit of a playboy. He wants to spend his life as a young man and live the life of luxury. So he asks his 5 children, but he gets cursed by Shukra. When Shukra finds out that Yayati has gone behind his back and married this Asura king's daughter, he gets very angry and curses Yayati and says, "You're going to lose your youth, and you become suddenly an old man." Suddenly he turns into an old geriatric person who can hardly walk. He's absolutely distressed. So he asked Shukra for forgiveness and asked him how to get away from this. Shukra says, "Okay, you can ask one of your children if they're happy to swap their youth with him." And he goes to the eldest, Yadu, and then goes down. Everybody refuses, except the youngest one, Puru. Puru agrees to swap his youth with the old man. So Yayati becomes young again and lives for a long time. When the time comes, Yayati relents his decision and gives up his youth back to Puru. And because Puru was so good when at the time of his need, he gives the central part of the empire. This is what's called the greatest place in the world. This is the place around the river Saraswati. And he gives the surrounding peripheral lands to the other 4 children, which did not go down very well, especially Yadu and Druhyus, because they thought they were the Yadus and Turvasas, because they thought they were the eldest and they should get the the central part of the empire. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The thing progressed. Yadu Turvasas became very strong, even in where they were given. They slowly start to expand their empire and come down the dynasty. They are probably about halfway down. We see King Bharata. He's the man who from which the name Bharata has come to our country, and he expands the central part of the of our country. And this again gets the other children, cousins, get very upset. And after about 18 generations down from Bharata, we get Divodasa and Sudasa. And this is where the problem starts. By this time, the Anu king, Abhyavartin Chayamana, he has a son who is not really very good. So he sends away his grandson, Kavi Chayamana, to learn under sage Jamadagni, who becomes extremely powerful and very knowledgeable. And but before he could ascend throne, Abhyavartin Chayamana dies. So Kavi Chayamana ascends the throne, much to the chagrin of some of the people in the country of Haryana, or the Anu country in the northwest, which now is the Persian country, Iran and Iraq, and that part of the Afghanistan. And he always felt that Purus have done them very bad, because they should have had the central part of the country. I'll come to Saraswati a little bit later on. So line by line, you can see the genealogy continuing from Ikshvaku, Prithu, Tarasadasyu, Purukutsa, Tushanku, Harishchandra, and further down, as the contemporary of Sudas is a man called Rohitashva. Rohitashva is quite friendly with Sudas still after the battle. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So this is the Yayati scourge. 16th generation after the Bharata, you get Divadasa, who enlarges his empire still further. But the central part is around Saraswati is given to Puru. This is where the crux of the problem is. I need to talk about Saraswati. Saraswati is, throughout the Rig Veda, you'll find this is the one river which has been extolled. There's an entire hymn on the river Saraswati. And it is called the river which flows from the mountains all the way through to the ocean. And the way it is positioned, especially in Nadistuti, you can see from east to west, this is the river after the Rishabdhuti. So it is between the river Yamuna, the Rishabdhuti on the east, and Satluj and Bias and Ravi on the west. So this is the river which was flowing from the mountains, from probably the Himalayas down, the Shivaliks down into the Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, and going into the Kutch. So because of the size of the river, the whole land was extremely fertile. Plus also down south, because of the Aravalli Mountains, the natural resources was extreme, like bronze, copper and tin, for them to make bronze weapons and etc. Was probably the best part of the entire empire. So everybody wanted the central place, especially the capital Ilam, probably Rakhigarhi or Kalibangan, I don't know which one it is. But what happened was, river Saraswati started to dry up. We know for a fact there were at least two major tectonic events. The one around 2300 BC, which lifted the Asian plate by about between 6 and 20 meters over a length of about 100 kilometers. This made river Satluj make an unnatural turn, but it makes a very unusual turn, over 90 degrees, which rivers do not do that, because the natural forces of water. If the water turns around 90 degrees, there is a lot of erosion on the acute angle and get destroyed. So you never get an acute angle, but river Satluj does have one. The river Satluj, by the name itself, Shatudri, means 100 braids. It's got lots of channels. So we have now, satellite imaging, we've discovered at least 100 or even more what you call paleo channels, or the dried beds of the river beds. They all come down to these so-called perennial rivers called seasonal rivers of Gaggar and Hukra, which are the remnants of river Saraswati. So what the experts tell me is, between say about 2900 and 1900 BC, River Saraswati started to deplete, and by about 1900 BC, it is almost completely dried up, leaving two segments, one up in the north called Gaggar and one in the Pakistan side called Hakra. It is only seasonal. There is water only during the rainy season. There is no place. To give you another example, by the time Mahabharata, River Saraswati doesn't exist. Mahabharata talks about the Saraswati disappearing in a place called Vinashana. It's in the middle of Rajasthan desert. So it disappears. So by this time, so we can roughly gauge the period of Mahabharata. It was definitely after the Saraswati had disappeared. And coming later on to the Puranic period, Saraswati doesn't exist at all. The Ganga becomes more prominent because the population had migrated from the Harappan civilization down into the Gangetic plains by this time because of the loss of the water. But now, where they have found over 2,000 Harappan sites in this desert, in like Bikaner and Jaisalmer, the area, and these places, some of them are huge, the size of Manhattan at that time. To survive, for that kind of population to survive in a desert is not possible. They should have had a fertile land. They should have had some sort of water supplies. So it's possible that the Saraswati did exist in this place where they say did exist. So this is why Saraswati is very important. So let's just go back to Rig Veda. I mean, I'm not trying to teach Rig Veda here because I'm not an expert. I know very little about Rig Veda. But from what I can understand is, this is an all-important scripture for us, not just for us, for the entire world. Because it's quoted by many of the Western scientists for the material that's contained in the Rig Veda. Which how they did this, how they found this is extremely difficult, or if not impossible to determine. Basically, it has got 10 books or mandalas. There are 1,028 hymns, 10,600 verses. When was it composed? Depends on who you talk to and which book you read. It could be 4 to 6,000 BC, or it could be 2,000, 3,000 BC. And some people go so far to say it's only 1,400 to 1,600 BC after the Aryans came from the northwest, from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and that places, and they brought the Rig Veda into the country around 1,400 BC. So you take it from which one you want to believe. But we know that reading through the Rig Veda itself, it was compiled and codified and after the Battle of Dashrajna. And later on, the Kuru kings classified into the number, from 1 to 10. And this numbering is also slightly odd. One would think the numbering would be from 1 to 10. 1 would be the oldest and the 10 would be the latest. But it doesn't go that way. It's based on the size of the hymns and the size of the book. Number 1, it goes from the descending order of the size from 1 to 10. Actually, number 1 and number 10 are the newest books. Probably number 10 is probably the latest book. And the oldest book is book 6. But most of the story from of Dashrajna comes from book 7. Book 8 and book 9, what's happened is people have added on afterwards. So quite a lot of mixed age. But generally speaking, book 6 is the oldest and book 10 is the youngest. The number 1 to 10 is in the descending order of number of sizes. We don't have very old collections. The oldest collection of Rigvedic manuscript we have is in Pune, Deccan Institute in Pune, which goes back to 1484. And each book is divided into 4 parts: Samhita, Brahmana, and Aranyakas and Upanishads. I'm not going into the detail because that's beyond this talk. But going to what happened to the Vedic gods and why did they disappear? The Vedic gods were Indra, Agni, Varuna, Mitra, and Brihaspati. Indra actually continued to be one of the leading deities until about 3rd to 5th century AD. The Shatavahanas, their royal deity was Indra. Krishna actually didn't come into the fold till much later. Sri Rama was there. So the earliest temples of Hindu gods are actually Rama. But whereas the Indra's temples, in Indra's idols were there till about between 3rd and 5th century AD. And Mitra Varna continues today. They are one of the main deities of Zoroastrianism. And Mitra Varnas were also the deities of Hittites and Mitannis. I mean, that's very important for people who want to follow the aging of this, the dating of the Dashrajna battle, because there is a treaty between the Hittites and Mitannis, which actually describes some of the events and some of the people from the Harappan civilization as well as their own. But Hittites and Mitannis, remember, it is not in India, it's in Turkey. So it's quite far away. So you can imagine that actually, instead of the Aryans coming from outside India, I think it's more likely that the people from India migrated outwards. But there's been task migration. Even now, you see people from India go abroad, and a lot of people from abroad come to live in India. So the same thing happened, thousands of years ago. And Mitra was the main deity of Mithraism. Mithraism is a very powerful religion in the early Roman times. I mean, most of the soldiers followed the Mithraism, especially when the Christianity started to take power after the Emperor Constantine started in the 3rd century. The Roman soldiers were afraid because they were praising a human being, Jesus Christ, as God, whereas they believed in some super being, like Mithra. So Mithraism continued as some sort of subversive religion among the Roman soldiers until about the 3rd or 4th century AD, and it was put down, very badly persecuted by the Christians at that time. Now, who are the actors in this drama? Now, on one side, we have Sudas and his two sages, Vasishta and Vishwamitra, which he changes side after halfway through, or probably in the beginning itself. And we have the Haihayas, this another tribes who's king with Dahavya in the eastern frontier around the Yamuna as a support. This is one-man band really on this side. Whereas the opposition, the confederacy, even though it says Dashrajna and 10 kings, there were more than 10 groups. It was led by Kavi Chaimana, there is an Anu king, and he was assisted by Vishwamitra. And some of the Purus are the same people as Sudas. Well, Sudas is Puru Bharata dynasty of Trichu tribe, whereas the other Purus were disgruntled with this rule or whatever. And the Yadus, Druhyus, Anus, these were the major kings of surrounding countries. And the Alinas were probably from Gandhara. And Bhaktas, as you were talking about, Aparna was talking about this before, Bhaktas and Pashtuns, and the Balinas from Bolan Pass. And then Shivas, Vaisanins, Himyus, Vakarnas. These are all the surrounding smaller tribes. They all join hands with Kavi Chaimana, because Sudas, when he ascends the throne, like what then did that when he became a Chakravartin, they had to do the Ashwamedha Yagna. The Ashwamedha Yagna, they let the horse loose, and the country submitted itself and offered the compensation, or he waged war against them. In the end, so all these countries were occupied by Sudas, by one way or the other through the Ashwamedha Yagna. So they were all unhappy. And on the eastern frontier, the Beda king was probably a Dasyu king, along with the help of the 3 tribals like Ajas, Shigru, and Eksu. They fought the battle. When did it take place? Well, again, lots and lots of people have said lots and lots of things. And, I'll just quote 3 people. David Frawley, I'm sure most people have heard of Vamadeva Shastri, as he's called, and he's been a fantastic Indologist, and he's done a huge amount of research, especially on yoga. He feels that this was probably from 3100 BC. He bases his position on astronomical references, mostly on the position of the stars and etc. in the Rigvedic scripture. And P.L. Bhargava is a noted historian. He puts it as 2350 BC because he based it on the Puranic king list. I'll come to the king list a little bit later on. And he puts the regnal years of about 18 years per person, per king. But Neeraj Mohanka believes that is a bit too short. Now, we know kings usually last between 20 and 25 years. Some of them last only 2 or 3 years, but the majority of them last around 20 to 25 years. So look at the European kings and also the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian kings. They lasted around between 20 and 25 years at that time. So he uses the 20 to 25 years as the regnal period, and he puts it down as 2700 BC. That is looking at towards the beginning of the mature phase of Harappan civilization, just before the beginning of the mature phase. What are the statistics of this battle? 10 kings plus tribals. There were 66,600 warriors, and out of which about 12,000 belonged to the Anu and Dirukyu tribes. And at the end of the battle, the Beda king on the east coast offers 2,000 horses. It says heads of horses. I'm sure he didn't chop off the heads and give it to Sudha. It's not much use, that is. So 2,000 horses were given to Sudas as compensation of the battle. And thousands of cattle were offered to Sudas at the end of the battle by the other kings. And Sudas, out of gratitude to Vasishtha for his help in the battle, gives him lots of gifts like milk, cattle, cows, land, etc. Again, just go into the brief. Sudas is made Chakravartin by Devadasa. What's happening was Kavi Chaimana was flexing his muscles around, and the other tribes and other kings surrounding, they were flexing their muscles and trying to encroach onto the Bharata Empire. And Devadasa's son, Pujavana, was a mild-mannered person. He was more into religion, dharma, and he was into battle and war, etc. His grandson, who was taught by Vishwamitra, Sudas, he was very powerful, and he was a king material. So he decided, Devadasa decided with the help of both Vishwamitra and Vasishtha, that Sudasa should become the emperor and the king. So he makes him the king. Now, at the same time, Kavi Chaimana ascends the throne, probably in what we call Mundigak now, at that time, probably the capital of the Anu king. So he, when he ascends the throne, he vows to avenge the faults of what happened in the past and bring back the Anu's power over the central part of the country, that is Purabharatan land, and assembles a large army of 66,600 warriors with the help of the other people. And he gets other tribes as well, as I was telling you before. And so Sudas gets this message that Chaimana is marching through the northwestern frontier into he had crossed the river Indus, crossed the Chenab and Sikni, and so he's coming towards the river Ravi. He sets off with his army towards the western front. At the same time, he gets a message from the east from King Vitahavya, Haheya, saying that, look, Beda is attacking the eastern frontier and he's destroying our country, our kingdom. You need to come and give us a hand, your help. So there is a disagreement between Vishwamitra and Vasishtha. Vasishtha insists that he should go to the west coast and deal with the major problem first before sending people to the east. Vishwamitra disagrees with, and he storms out of the court, and then he goes and joins Kavi Chaimana. Now, what happens? They cross the river Ravi, and the battle is one-sided, because obviously you can imagine Sudas is one man with his army, and whereas Kavi Chaimana has got a huge army of 66,600 soldiers and elephants and horses, etc. So the battle is one-sided, and he gets routed. So they're running back, escaping the battlefield, and coming. They trying to cross the river Ravi, which is in spate. The river Sage Vasishtha prays to God Indra for help. But doesn't this remind you of Krishna and his help to Pandavas? It's exactly the same sort of problem here. So Indra helps, and a dike appears on the river Ravi. The whole river slows down and allows the Sudas' army to cross. And when the Chaimana's army, the Confederate army, tries to cross, the dike is broken and there's a flood. Most of these the warriors drown and get killed. And there is a battle actually on the river itself. And the Chamana, he fights very bravely. He's a very brave soldier. And there is a lot of good things said about Chamana in Veda. He's not considered to be a bad person. I mean, if you look at Mahabharata, for example, Duryodhana, Suryodhana, and all those people are not considered to be bad people. They were badly advised and they went into war against Pandavas. So they, in essence, they are not really bad people. So it's exactly the same. The Chamana is not a bad person. He gets bad advice and bad decisions were made and he goes to war, thinking what he was doing right for his country, Panu kingdom. Okay. So, but he fights very bravely and he gets killed on the river itself. So Indra obviously helps Sudas and Vasishta and doesn't help Vishwamitra and Chamana. But during this period, this battle goes on for, unlike as I said before, Mahabharata and Ramayana, it goes on for a long period. And Sudas gets a message about the dire position of the East Coast. So he sends soldiers across to the East Coast and to east towards the eastern border towards the Yamuna and fights the Vedas and his colleagues, Ajasyagru's. And then he defeats Vedas and he gets compensation by the Vedas. So this, at the end of the battle, the central part of the country is stabilized. So Sudas is offered 2,000 horses, as I said, hatched by his allies, and thousands of cattle offered as a compensation. And Sage Vasishta gets honored by Sudas. Now, we come to the end of the battle. So, battle is a battle. There's so many battles in Rigveda itself. This battle in Purushni was the second battle. This is not the first battle. So why this battle is so important? There are so many other battles in the Vedic scripture itself, and also after Vedas, there are so many battles. Why this battle is important? Why should I think that this should be made into an epic? If you look at Oxford Dictionary, it says it's a long poem, typically one derived from ancient oral tradition, narrating the deeds and adventures of a legendary figures or the past history of a nation. Okay. Now, there are one or two problems with this definition. The Dasharajana itself is not a very long poem. And probably Mahabharata and Ramayana were neither. This was made into a long epic by future generations because this was eulogized, all the people were eulogized, and the actual song was sung by minstrels, the poets, and the authors added on, and there were so many subplots and so additional stories that added on, and it became a huge. Mahabharata is now still considered probably the longest poem in existence at the moment. So this is mainly because for all the other people, not the original the poem itself. So unfortunately, Rigveda being hidden in the Rigveda, you must not forget that until probably about 100 years ago, the only people who could read Sanskrit and only people who were allowed to read the Vedic scriptures were the high caste Brahmins. No one else was allowed to read them. Unfortunately, this stifled research, this stifled decipherment. Even today, people tell me up to 40% of Rig Veda, even though it has been translated, it has not been deciphered because Rig Veda is a very complex book. I mean, I haven't read Sanskrit version. I've read the English translations of Rao Griffiths. I've read Prasanna Gautama's, which I think is probably one of the simplest translations. And even the simplest translation of Prasanna Gautama is actually quite complex. It needs somebody to decipher these things for us to understand. So when that's the case, so it was not in common knowledge that Dasharajana was a battle which actually made the central part of India to what it is, and then the nation actually was born. Even though King Bharata established the Bharata kingdom, the establishment of Vedic Dharma and the Hindu Dharma was actually done during the period of Dasharajana. For me, it forms a transition from uncertainty to centralization of power and Vedic knowledge. It strengthened the hold of Pura Bharatas and their Vedic values. The reason why I say this is, Sudas in his actions, and also Deodasa in his actions, has shown that they upheld the Vedic values, which we hold true today, and which is probably the center of our Hindu Dharma as we know, and which teaches faith rather than religion. So it is not religion, it is the faith, which we have to understand. Because a lot of people mistake Hindu as a religion. Hinduism is not a religion, as you all know. It's a faith. Puru Bharatas understood that and established the Vedic values in the central part of the country, and that actually formed the nucleus of the future of country, the future of India. And even though it was established with Bharata, he did not expand the Vedic knowledge beyond its borders. Whereas Sudas was instrumental in establishing the Vedic knowledge and making it as probably the national and the regional values to be propagated and to be followed by everybody. So this is also a conflict between basic human values and possession of wealth and faith. Because what did Chaimana want? He wanted the land. He wanted more cattle. He wanted more wealth. He wanted his ancestral property. He was not after the Vedic values and Vedic beliefs, whereas Sudas was fighting for the human faith and human values. So this is why I think it's very important that we should identify this as an epic. To quote Sri Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, he quotes Vedas so much as a basis of his teachings. And we believe Bhagavad Gita is our core faith. So if we believe that Krishna was giving us the knowledge that we should follow for generations to come, I think this is where it was established, probably a few hundred years before Krishna was. Rig Veda, which was considered to be the greatest living scripture in the world, not by just the Indians, by Westerners as well, was codified and formatted under Sudas. So it's very important to understand that. So this happened only because of Dashrajna. So he understood after the battle that he has to do something to stabilize the faith and the faith of the people. And also he established the Kuru Bharata dynasty from there onwards. I mean, we can go further down, and that's where the Kuru kingdom starts, and then the Pandavas and the Kauravas come, and there is a further battle, but then that's a different story altogether. And the Ikshvakus come on the other side, actually the cousins, and Sri Rama. Ramayana, look at Ramayana, how many places the Vedas are quoted? And anything that is said in Veda is considered to be the truth. So I think Dashrajna has done more towards the unification of India than anything else in our ancient history. Now, I've done a little blog, probably about 6 years ago on this thing. If anybody wants to read it, it's on Harappa series on WordPress. And if there's this is the hymn that I was talking about. This is the main hymn, the hymn 718 of book 7. And this is the English translation. I can read. It's fairly simple English. You can understand. It's easy to understand. But Dashrajna is actually quoted elsewhere, not just in book 7. But book 7 is the main part, and it's also in book 6 and book 3. Yeah, and Sudas gets mentioned in lots of places, and Divodasa is also mentioned in lots of places. So you can read that as well. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take.
You see, if you do an Ashwamedha Yajna, that itself is an imperial undertaking.
It is.
Right. So, I mean, it is not any different from a regular invasion, except that you have this Ashwamedha also to go with it and seek tribute from all your surrounding kings. So, how does that make Sudas any different from any other conqueror in general?
Yeah, this is a question that's completely outside Dashrajna. Okay. Anyway, this is a question that thousands of people have asked for centuries, because how does this make any other king or an emperor different to Hitler? And Hitler did exactly the same thing. He occupied the lands across Europe and North Africa, and he killed, slaughtered millions of people and did the same thing. So how is he different to what King Ashoka did? He also did exactly the same thing. and to realize what he did was wrong. So Ashwamedha Yagna is just a method of what an emperor was supposed to do. The Manu, according to his rules and regulations, a Chakravarti, when he forms, he is supposed to strengthen his kingdom. One way of strengthening his kingdom is supposed to strengthen his borders, and any threats around the borders is supposed to subjugate. Okay, I mean, this is my understanding of it. I fully understand where you're coming from, yeah, because you did exactly what any other conqueror did. But in this context, where Chaimana was basically intent on taking more and more land without the explicit understanding of Ashwamedha Yagna, whereas Sudas did it with Ashwamedha Yagna. But again, and the Dasharajna war itself comes. He was not fighting for a land. Do you understand my point of view? I'm not trying to justify what he did. I'm just trying to explain what is written in the book.
Dr. Kashyap, I would like you to speak more about the defeated tribes, particularly, like I mentioned, the Pakhtas and the Parsas, who may because Sanjeev Sanyal does not give a conclusive answer. He says they could be the Pakhtuns and the Parsa could be the Persians. But most of all, I would like you to speak about the Yazidis among the Kurds in northern Iran or Iraq, northern Iraq.
Iraq.
Because their culture is uncannily very similar to Indians, to Hindus. They have spiral temples, they face the sun and pray, and they believe in reincarnation, and so many, and they believe in the peacock god. Now, peacock is not native to Iraq.
Yeah.
It is.
No.
So, do you think that
you're absolutely right? I mean, we are getting into a slightly murky waters here with the Aryan migration theory. All right. See, the Aryan migration theories was started by Max Muller and propagated later on by most of the Western authors at the time, and is still being propagated by several of our Indian colleagues. But unfortunately, I do not believe there was an Aryan migration. At the same time, there's some people who are trying to say that the Indians, the Aryans, migrated from India outwards into the West. But what I believe is, which the DNA studies recently have confirmed, is there's been transmigration from east to west over thousands of years. Now, I was talking about Hittanis and Hittites and Hittites and Mitannis. There is actually a treaty between the Hittites and Mitannis after a prolonged war in probably 1300 BC. Okay, in this treaty, all the Rigvedic gods are mentioned as coming to support as an evidence to this particular treaty. So you can see that this is so people who believe in Aryan migration will say that the guys from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan came down via Turkey into India, and this is where it shows you this migration took place around 1400 to 1300 BC. But whereas people who believe the Indians went abroad, say that look, Indians went to these places. But having said that, it is possible, most likely, the Aryans migrated from India across to the northwest and into the Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and Sumeria, because we have seen now a place called Lagash in Iraq, where there is evidence to show that there is Harappan seals, and there is a person called Shu Ilushu. He's considered to be a translator from Meluha. They used to call Harappan country as Meluha, and from Meluhan's language to the Sumerian language. So there were if you look at Akkadian history, you can see that the Akkadian books show that there are ships from Meluha used to come and dock in Akkad. We still don't know where Akkad existed. We still don't know. There's a place in Bahrain. If you go to Bahrain, Kuwait, that sort of area, where there is, those places called Dilmun and Magan. And there, unfortunately, you're not allowed to dig as much as you would in any other part of the world because of the religious beliefs. They do not allow digging of graves, etc. So this is probably where you will find a Rosetta Stone. Until you find a Rosetta Stone, which would have both a Sumerian script and the Indus script, we won't know exactly what the transaction was between these two civilizations. We have found lots of Harappan evidence in the Sumeria, but we have not found many of the Sumerian, so like for example, seals in Harappan civilization. So there was a looks like there must be one-sided migrating. This to me suggests the Harappans went across to the west, and they didn't come down to the east. But recent RNA studies have shown there has been some mixture between the people in Iran, Iraq, and as well as India. So it's possible that there was transmigration rather than migration of one side, the other. So
and again,
I think the Pakhtuns are probably one of the tribes in the northwest around the Indus Valley, going into Balochistan and into Pakhtun area, and the Pashtuns, and also the same people. Anus and Druhyus probably went up to northwest. You heard of Bactria-Marjana complex. Like going back into Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and they settle down at the top of the north, because some of the practices they follow, and there have been quite a few. Like if you go on Amud,
they are the ones that we called Malechas later on.
Malechas again, if it depends on different part of the Rig Veda itself. In parts of Rig Veda, it says Mlecha is a bad person, and another part of the Mlecha just means a foreigner. So it could be either. So Mlecha is a term rather than a description of a particular tribe. Okay, but I think the Persians were probably Anus and Druhyus. Druhyus became Gandhara, and Gandhara is further up north, and the Anus probably went west towards the Iran, and they became the Persians. And they followed. If you look at, I don't know if you have heard of Avestans and Zoroastrians. And if you look at their history, their history goes back to around 1500, 1800 BC. And if you look at their gods and their history, the language is very similar to Sanskrit. A lot of the words, there are some changes from Sa to Ha.
Hapta Hindu, and so much so that even Ahura Mazda, they say is translation of Asura, a Western pronunciation.
Asura is a god, whereas for us, Sura is a god. For them, Sura is a bad person. For us, Asura is a bad person. So you can see there is a lot of relationship between what is written in Rig Veda and what is written in Zend Avesta. So if you read both of them, you start to understand these things are probably related and probably come from the same basic principle, from basic knowledge in the same group of people rather than completely different people. We became different people later on because they migrated west and we stayed behind.
And what did you say particularly about the Yezdis?
Yezdis, we didn't stop there. For example, the Mithraism was in Rome. So in Yazidis were even further, further towards east. So they went Iraq. In Egypt, they have found Harappan seals, and evidence of Harappan villages in Egypt. So in Rome, Italy, we haven't found any Harappan evidence, but we have found lots of evidence of Mithraism. Mithraism was flourishing between 1st and 4th century AD under the Roman rule. So Mithraism is nothing but Hinduism, Vedic principles going across there. They believed in Mithra rather than other gods, but they didn't believe in Christ.
Stretching my imagination just too far, there still exist a community of Sufis in the Eastern Europe who consider horses as sacred, who do this horse therapy and all, and their beliefs are also very, very, very similar to Aryans.
I won't be surprised. I haven't come across that bit, but I won't be surprised at all.
Presented some original inputs here. And, it's great to hear that finally Hindus are taking up the history of the Battle of the Ten Kings, because it's the major historical event within the Rig Veda. In fact, if I were the Indian government or the Pakistani government, I would, open a theme park on the Ravi River, which happens to be the border between India and Pakistan. So this Ten Kings battle was actually the first Indo-Pak war, which I dare to add has been won by India. So this is very good. And of course, we're all groping in the dark and discovering things. As for the Yazidis, I would briefly add that, in my opinion, they are part of a later emigration. They are not part of this. Anna was defeated in that battle. You see, the battle must have been about 3000 BC. The emigration which brought the Mitanni people, the Kassites, and indeed the Yazidis to West Asia was 1,000 years later, when the Saraswati desiccated. And so there was a famine in India, and that's why there was all this migration. Anyway, you see, one thing that I find difficult, and there I tend to agree with the very first questioner, is this idea of a moral superiority of Sudas vis-a-vis his enemies. I mean, if you look at the map, it is Sudas who was being an imperialist. He was seeking to win more land. He was based in the Saraswati Basin. That was his hereditary fiefdom, so to speak. And so he was expanding to the east with his battle on the Yamuna, and also to the west with his battle on the Ravi. And so, because he had already penetrated too deep in their country, the Anava tribe, decided to stop him. So they all got together, because to them this was a really vital issue. So they forgot their internal quarrels. They all got together to defeat Sudas, and in the normal course of things, they would have done so. But you see, because of a combination of enormous good luck and strategic acumen, Sudas managed to win anyway. And so he conquered land more to the west. And so that's why the Yanavas had to flee. And there you get a part of the out of India scenario, where the Iranians leave India and they make Afghanistan their center. But so all this is just a normal human event. I mean, if you talk about the war of, let's say, Napoleon against the English, in France, they would say, yeah, but Napoleon brought modern notions of equality and justice and so on. And the English were aristocrats and obscurantists, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe, but that had nothing to do with the reason why the war was fought. It was simply Napoleon wanted to expand, the British wanted to expand, and so it was a clash of power. And so I'm afraid that in the case of the Vedas, the moral reading of, a war of good against bad has only been read into it afterwards. And that at the time itself, it was just a war. Two people who wanted to win. At least, that's my impression so far. Maybe you have new inputs about that.
I think you're right, Dr. Els, because I was trying to just expand on what's written in that hymn, but you're absolutely right. It's probably written long after the book itself, and they sort of made for other people to believe that Sudas was trying to do some good instead of being an expansionist, as you said. And as our Mr. Ramakrishna suggested, is absolutely right. He was trying to expand his empire like all the kings did in history. I mean, even now people are still doing it. So it's nothing new, and I think it's avarice rather than belief in faith. But the book says otherwise, obviously trying to justify what had happened. And luckily he won. And his saying goes, victor writes the history, isn't it?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thank you very much.
As far as I know, Anu went to today's Turkey and Greece. The Druyus went to Central Europe. Finally, Turvasu went to Central Asia, and the Yadu settled in today's Israel. Is this correct?
That's slightly far-fetched, I think, because there is no archaeological evidence to suggest these things. I mean, especially people moving into Greece. I haven't heard that one before. There was one book actually written by a Greek author. It was published about 8-9 years ago. He suggested that the Aryans came to Greece and the precursors of Alexander the Great, etc. But I think that's stretching our imagination slightly. And if you look at the actual dispersion of people, Yadus and Turvasas went south. I mean, Yadu, Sri Krishna is not from the north. He actually moved down south. Okay, so Turvasas is the southeast. So and Anus, as Dr. El said, they moved towards Turkey, and towards Iran and Iraq, and they probably later on became the Yazidis and the Hittites and Mitannis and all those people. And Central Europe, it's again, they probably much later, and they may be transferred as the faith being moved across. For example, like Buddhism going into China, Buddhists didn't go and invade China. The Buddhist preachers went there and spread the religion. So that's probably how it went to Rome and Central Europe. I don't think there is enough proof to suggest that the Anus went all the way to Central Europe or they went into Israel. I don't think there's any evidence for that, unfortunately.
Which Rigveda hymns describe the differences of beliefs, like some details for how they believed and why they went on for war for their beliefs. And second question is, any other Indian text that mention this for, or some people involved in this for?
First question is the most details of the battle and the for and against, and also the to's and fro's of the battle is given in hymn 18 of book 7. That's quite a long the hymn. So if you read that, the translations of several people, and I would recommend Prasanna Gautama's book, probably the best one to read, because the earliest one is Robert Griffiths, is extremely complex to read and understand. There are quite a few other translations, but I think the simplest one would be probably Prasanna Gautama's translation.
So second question was that this Dashtratnya Yudh was, is there any mention of this war in any other our Puranas or any such text?
No, there are no mention of Dashtratnya war, but there is mention of both Sudas and Divodasa in quite a few of the Puranas. But Dashtratnya war itself doesn't get a mention in as much detail as the Rigveda itself.
There was a cultural destruction after the war? The one who won and he tried to destroy the culture. And my second question is, we have seen many of the illogical things. We see from today's scientific experience, we see many illogical things in that way. So what is your take on that?
Well, I don't think there was any cultural destruction after the battle, because as I said before, he established the Vedic principles in the country, in the expanding kingdom, and he made, and then it gradually progressed into the Mahabharata and Ramayana when the people gradually migrated towards east into Gangetic plain. So it actually expanded and gradually evolved into present-day Hinduism. I didn't understand the second question. What did you say the second question was?
So my second question was, when we today read the Rigveda, so we always see there are some when we see today's world, we see some of the points which we can't understand, or we can say it illogical. Okay, today's people say it illogical. So what is your the view on that? Because we can't connect with it today.
I'm not sure what you mean by illogical, but there are lots of, as I said in my talk, nearly 40% of the book has not been deciphered. It's been the whole entire book has been translated, but not entire book has been deciphered. So we don't understand a lot of everything that's been said. I mean, for example, only now people are beginning to understand that there are some principles of quantum physics which were understood by the sages at that time. And how do you explain that? And for example, just to give you a very simple example, I know we've been to any of the Hindu marriages. After the Mangal Sutra, they take you outside in bright sunshine and point to the sky and then say, "Can you see Arundhati star?" You're supposed to see Arundhati star. If you know which one is the Arundhati star, if you look at the Saptarshi Mandala, that is the Big Dipper, the seven stars, and one of the stars, Akura, this Arundhati star is one of the minor, it's a twin star. The second star is the Arundhati star. Even with a powerful telescope, this second star is difficult, or if not impossible, to see. So my question to you is, how did the sages in those days, without a telescope, knew the existence of this star, and how did they describe this star? Because they have described very accurately the position of the star in relation to these 7 stars. So there are lots of things in the Vedic scriptures which we do not understand. Just because we do not understand, you can't dismiss it as illogical. So until the book is completely deciphered, I think you should take what you can understand, leave the rest of them for the experts to decipher, or unless you are good enough to decipher it, that'll be even better. So it's a bit difficult to say anything that's written there is illogical without understanding it. Yeah, I hope I have answered your question.
Many of us think that means when we read, so how it is possible that
Yes,
how
we don't
it was.
understand. Yeah, just because we don't understand doesn't mean it didn't happen. Okay.
Yes.
So you said that this Dasharaja Yuddha is important one, which actually is centered, and then making sure Vedas are prevalent, made sure Vedas got prevalence, and then Hinduism evolved to what it is today. But my question is like, say go to Bhagavata Purana or something, which is written by Vyasa himself, who gave us the Vedas. There he says like in the Tamasa Manvantara, which is like many Manvantaras back, actually the Gajendra Moksha event happened, and while explaining, like example, say Gajendra himself, Vyasa says that this elephant in the previous birth was he describes that as Arya Dramina Sattamaha. Example, I mean, like Vyasa says that elephant in his previous birth was a South Indian Aryan king. So what I'm trying to say is like, it's not only like 2000 years back or something. If you put across what is there in the Vedas or Purana and everything, it goes beyond what we are trying to say here. That's one thing. The second question is, so if we are saying Aryan migration theory inside or outside, why only India has the Veda, or the Hindu culture is having the Vedas as the epicenter of its culture, and not any other culture which is showcased outside of India?
To be honest, I didn't understand the first question. It looked more like a statement to me, and I'm quite happy with what you said. The second question is, the Persians have what you call a Zend Avesta. If you read, it's very similar to what is written in Rig Veda. It's in a different language. It's an Avestan language. And there's no reason why, if the Aryans did go outside, should take the whole entire Veda across there to wherever they went. They probably migrated towards the east, west, or wherever they went, and they probably didn't take the Vedas. And even if they did take the Vedas, it didn't persist, because if, for example, Mitannis and Hittites, they left some legacy, but they didn't leave the civilization didn't continue into present-day Turkish civilization. It gradually descended into present-day civilization. So there are lots of reasons why the Vedas are not seen outside the country. And the people who believe in the Aryan migration theory, they think that the Vedas were written by the people who came from outside to India. And so they believe that, as you said, this is why Veda exists only in India, not outside. But that's not completely true.
This is very simple. I mean, never mind our opinion. What is the opinion of all the ancient commentators on the Rig Veda? I mean, people have commented like Shayanacharya and so on. I mean, what has been their opinion of this Dasharagya Yuddha?
Yeah, you're quite right. It's very interesting, because I have looked through the various books and scriptures, trying to find out what did all these famous people said about. There are lots of things written on Rig Veda. Okay, like for Pratisakyas, been written quite a few Pratisakyas there on Rig Veda, but none of them actually discuss the events in Dasharajana and say whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. And they're more in terms of looking at the rights and wrongs of what is written in Rig Veda and whether it is true or untrue. And secondly, if you look at a lot of these books written on by the ancient commentators, they were trying to explain how to read the Rig Veda and how to understand the Rig Veda. So they were not trying to analyze the thing by what is right, what is wrong. And as you rightly said, Dasharajana is is maybe my opinion or our opinion, and not our ancestors' opinion. But I have not found any book which actually made a specific comment on Dashraj, unless Dr. Elst has got any ideas that I haven't come across. Dr. Elst?
Not pertinent to this one. I mean, of course, there's a lot to say about this this encounter, and so it is indeed very important in India's history, and indeed in world history, because it chased the Iranians and the Greeks and so on from India. And so they later set up their own history in Iran, in Armenia, in Greece, in Albania. So, you know, the impact on world history is enormous. You know, but on this particular question, I do not have much to add. You know, again, I repeat my enthusiasm, you know, for finally, you know, this focus on the Dasharajna battle, because it was so important, not just for India, for the rest also.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elst.
And we relate the Akkadian Assyrian peoples with the Asuras mentioned in the Vedas. Cuneiform records, there are mentioning of a Akkadian king Sargon and his son defeating the coalition forces of Elam, Marhashi and Meluhan troops. So is there any possibility that they have conquered the areas of IVC, and then this Akkadian peoples mentioned in the Vedas as the Asuras? This is my question.
Asuras, if you go to Rigvedic period, Asuras are not bad people. All right. I mean, what we understand by Asura now means like demons and monsters. But during the Rigvedic time, Asuras and Suras were two different faces of the same coin. And I know about the Akkadian battle. Akkadian battle, the Akkadians and the Elamites were bitter enemies, like what India and Pakistan is now. And they had several battles. And this all happened on the other side of the Zagros Mountains. Okay, and then they had very little to do with the Indus Valley civilization at the time. There was a lot of merchant business going across between Akkadian Empire as well as the Indus Valley. If you remember, Akkadian Empire happened by the time Akkadians actually came to power. The Indus Valley civilization was on the decline, because you see this happened in the 14th century to 15th century BC. And by 19th century BC, the Harappan civilization was going downhill. And by 13th century BC, they didn't exist. So there was not much of a Harappan civilization when Akkadians were in power. You may be talking with Sumerians, yes. Between Sumeria and Harappans, there was a lot of movement between the two civilizations, well, especially the Harappans going towards the Sumerians. But the Akkadians came much later.
There is a question from a participant. How old is the Rig Veda?
Good question. How long is a string? Nobody really knows. And, the only thing we know for sure is it was composed over a period of 600 years. Because it's so huge. And the language from, say, book 1 to book 10, or the oldest book 6 to book 1 is different. It has evolved over a period of time. So based on that, they know it was composed over 100 years. And some people like Witzel think that it was composed around 1400 BC. He bases this on movements in Bactria-Margiana complex civilizations disappearing around that period. And then there are some evidence of the chariots and the horses coming down towards the Indus Valley civilization. So there are lots of ifs and buts, and some people claim it was composed around 6000 BC. Some people say about 1400, 1500 BC. And realistically speaking, I have absolutely no idea when it was composed. Definitely during the, as I said, some of the evidence that shows what I've gone through in this talk, it must be before the mature Harappan phase. And there is a lot of evidence to show that the battles in the Vedas and also in the Puranic battles took place in the fields. They didn't go and destroy the towns and cities. And Rig Veda has got, one of the things against people talking about against Rig Veda is It is a pastoral document. There are people in Rig Veda who are all farmers and cow herders. But if you look at that, and there is a stratification of kingship, like who is a Samrat, who is a Rajan, who is a Rajaka, and there is Sabhas and Samitis. Why, if you are a farmer out in the fields, why would you want a Sabha? Why would you want a Samiti? You don't want all that. You want you need that only if there is an urban civilization. Just because they don't mention brick in the Rig Veda. So there is no mention of brick in Rig Veda anywhere. So they've taken that as a reason why it was not an urban civilization. It was a pastoral civilization living in the forest and in the jungles and in the fields, which I don't think is true. It is not borne out by the Vedas.
And why would they mention brick? Because it is primarily a spiritual advice.
Well, in fact, Rig Veda may not have bricks, but the Atharvana Veda definitely has, because it gives you the way how the yagnas are done, and it tells you how to build the yagnas. And there are all different shapes of yagnas for different yagnas. So the yagna kundas, the way it is built is described, and the way it is described gives you an idea, but there are Harappan bricks. There's no doubt about it. So I don't understand the logic behind why this was to tell you this. I'm Dr. L still bear me out, because this was done by people during the 18th and 19th centuries for their own advantage. They came into this country and they were trying to subjugate the population. One way of subjugation is moral superiority. So if you tell the country you go to that, our ancestors came and gave you civilization, and we have come down here now because your civilization deteriorated. We are trying to uplift you again. Now you keep on saying it again and again and again and again. You start to believe. It's mass hypnotism. This is what they did. And unfortunately for us, even after independence, it's still being perpetuated. 70 years after the independence, we are still talking about. I was a few years ago, I was in Delhi Public School giving a talk on Harappan civilization. I was quite shocked to see the textbooks which still describe the Harappan civilization topic the same as it was in 1964 when I was going to school. It has not changed. And they still talk about Aryan migration. They still talk about the Vedic knowledge brought in from outside. That is, to me, is really shameful. And that should be changed.
Good evening, doctor.
Good evening.
I'm very recently trying to understand Vedas and Upanishads to a little deeper degree. So please excuse me if my question sounds a little primitive. I'm still trying to understand where it all fits in. In Puranas, we have read that there was a great war between Vishwamitra. He was still called the King Kaushika. He became the Maharshi, and then between the sage Vasishta, who he was constantly in a competition with.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, does this Dasharagnya war has anything in common between the war between these two sages, or did this get escalated to Dasharagnya war later on when they collected the others to help them out in this? I'm just trying to get things in the right respect.
Just to give you a little brief overview of all these names, Vasishta and Vishwamitra. These are all not individual people. They're all family names. Okay. Vishwamitra comes from a place called Ghadi Kingdom. So Ghadi's son was Vishwamitra, who was the original Vishwamitra, who was, because he had a fight with Vasishta. I'm sure you have read the story about him going to Vasishta's ashram and wanted the Kamadhenu cow and had a fight, and Vasishta destroyed his army. And that's when he decided he wanted to become a Brahmarshi. All right, so he went to the forest and 1,000 years of whatever and all that, and he became Brahmarshi. Okay. And then their descendants. Okay, but that sort of rivalry between the Vasishta and Vishwamitra is not between Vasishta and Vishwamitra. It's between the two families. So the descendants. Okay. The Ghadi's son, Vishwamitra, who fought with the Vasishta at the time, is not the same Vishwamitra and Vasishta of Dasharagnya war. Because the years are quite a long period between these two events. Okay. But there is always a rivalry between Vishwamitra and Vasishta. So if you look at even Ramayana and Mahabharata, these sages get mentioned. And if you're looking at a few hundred years difference, I mean, you can't imagine a human being living for 1,000 years. All right, yeah. So they're different. So but at the time of Dasharajna, there was a huge conflict between these two sages.
Okay.
Vishwamitra takes the side of Kavi Chaimana, and Vasishtha takes the side of Sudas. The only thing we know is Vasishtha was slightly older than Vishwamitra during this period.
I'll get a better perspective into the scriptures once I get back to them and read. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Kashyap, I have one question. A little later in the Rig Veda, there's a mention of the third generation of King Sudas. His name is King Somak. And it's called the Varshgir War, which was fought in Afghanistan, where these exact same tribes,
Sarayu River,
the exact same tribes who were defeated during King Sudas's time, they were always trying to get even with them and enter into this fertile land past the Sindhu civilization. So in that war too, there was a different strategy used by King Somak, who's the third generation of King Sudas. King Sudas let them come into his territory and then fight them. But King Somak went into their territory and defeated them. He didn't allow them to come into their territory. So there's nothing spoken about why this continuous, affiliation towards King Sudas and his lineage, and to prove how they protected this territory from going into the hands of different people. So isn't this a kind of, I know we need to doubt our Vedas and, we are open to that. But if there's a particular lineage of kings who is constantly talked about in the Vedas, I think sometimes we need to accept that there must be something special about these families and how they fought for their territory, whether they were coming in or going out. Plus Vasishtha and Vishwamitra. I think Vasishtha was also the guru of Sri Rama. So why this affiliation towards a particular lineage? I would like to understand from.
Well, as I started in the beginning, when I'm going to the prelude of the battle itself, looking at the family tree, I mean, these are all children of the same people at the top, like Ila and Ikshvaku. Okay. Ikshvaku's generation becomes Rama, and then Ila's generation coming into Sudas, Anus, Druhyus, and Turvasas, and all those people. What they're trying to show in these books is that the youngest person, Puru, who showed himself when his father asked for his as a youth to be this righteous person, and as Mr. Ramakrishnan said, and that else corroborated in the end, there is no such thing as good and bad, and they were always trying to do the same thing, trying to expand their countries. But one thing that is sure is that the Sudasa's lineage or Bharata's lineage, as we talk, instead of saying Sudasa's lineage, it should be King Bharata's lineage. King Bharata is about 18 generations above Sudas. King Bharata's lineage, they insisted on Vedic values and Vedic beliefs, and they wanted to establish the Vedas. Okay. So obviously what it means is probably the other people were not as keen on the Vedic principles and the Aryan principles. I mean, it's only an assumption. Tell you, I haven't read this anywhere else. Yeah? Okay. So this, and if you follow this through, it comes down to your Mahabharata war. The Kuru is actually a descendant of Sudas. And then the kingdom starts, and then you get this division between two cousins and the Pandavas and Kauravas and battle. And again, the battle again in Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita and why is there a war between cousins, because they're all blood brothers. Really, they shouldn't be fighting each other. But Krishna explains why this fighting is done because of dharma. All right. So this follows through, and I think he probably says it better to persist for a period of time, and why it persisted, and maybe because of that, I think we have Hinduism from what it is now. And as I was saying, flippantly, I didn't mean that it would happen, but if it had gone the other way, if Somaka had given up, had waited for, if I remember his name, is Vishtaspa to come across, Vishtaspa to come across and defeat the Somaka and Sahadeva. They're two brothers, Sahadeva and Somaka. and they defeated them, and then we would all become Zoroastrians. We'll be following the Agni, Indra, and whether it's good or bad, don't know. Yeah, but that's where we are now. So we have to believe that what we have is right, and so what happened then is right. So because we believe Hindu faith is what we have, and we believe that that's the best faith that we could have. And if not, we would have been following Zoroastrian beliefs.
Yes, in fact, in the Rigveda, it's also mentioned while this describing this war, it says that the other side, the Confederacy, did not worship Indra and Varun. It's mentioned in the Rigveda, and also they were more on the side of greed and materialism.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a mention of some sort of a moral superiority if you go through it.
As Dr. S said, this was sort of probably added on later on. At the time, the question was probably not moral superiority, is question of expansionism. Like all emperors and all kings in ages, they all wanted to make the kingdom bigger and better and richer. And, I think that's what Sudas wanted to do, and that's what Chayamana wanted to do. That is what Somaka and Sahadeva wanted to do. That's what Vishtaspa wanted to do. By the way, that's my next book, The Battle of Varshagiras, coming probably end of this year.
I mean, there is no end to questions on this subject anyway. We know that. But just one comment and one question. Comment is that, as a colonial strategy, calling the Rig Veda pastoral might actually be counterproductive, because you see, the colonized people, Hindus, they actually worship a pastoral person who is Krishna, who is a cowherd. So I don't think this is, even if it is a colonial strategy, first of all, I don't think it is, but even if it is, then it's not a very good colonial strategy, because that will only elevate the status of Yadavas to nation builders. Okay, so that being said, the other part is, I want to know what you think of the Indra motif within the two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, because I feel that there's a very strong Indra motif in the sense that Rama actually ascends Indra's chariot in the ultimate fight with Ravana. That is one part. And throughout the Mahabharata, you know that Arjuna and Bhima, basically Indra and Maruts, are fighting side by side, which is as it is in the Rig Veda.
Yes, yeah, it is. Well, as I said, the Indra doesn't disappear until much later, after the Vedic book has been composed and probably finished, and the Vedic language itself is gone. So I think it continues. As I was saying, it continued till the period of Shatavahanas, probably 3rd and 5th century AD. And Indra doesn't really disappear until after that. I think the main reason was because Indra is portrayed as a rather violent and aggressive god, like Zeus of the Greek gods. So that's probably put a lot of people off. And we had these righteous gods like Sri Krishna and Sri Rama, which became the pantheon of Indian Hinduism. And this is only my guess, I may be wrong, but that's probably why Indra sort of petered out over a period of a few hundred years. I hope I answered your question.
Questions in the chat box. I'll read them together. The first one says Puranic and Vedic gods are different. So how does this transition of Vedic gods to Puranic gods happened? Number 2, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma were not gods in Vedas, but then they became gods. How did they become gods? And number 3, in Ramayana period and in Mahabharata period, who was it that people used to worship?
Well, I think the answer to all three are probably very similar. I think, as I said in Vedas, the main deities were Indra, Varuna, Mitra, Brihaspati, along with the rivers like Saraswati, Bhagirathi, and Yamuna. Whereas in the Puranic period, it became Sri Rama, Krishna, and then Vishnu. But if you look at the Vedas, later books of Vedas, Vishnu does come into being. And Rudra is also mentioned in the later books of Rig Veda. So the things change because, as I said, the Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan civilization migrated from where what happened was, as the river Saraswati dried up, the people started to migrate towards the Gangetic plain. Okay, and then they're looking at the Puranas and then the Vedas. The Kuru Bharata dynasty went towards towards the Kuru kingdom. They also migrated towards the east, and Ikshvaku dynasty started to get into prominence, and then Sri Rama came into being, like Panchala Kosalas, and the Kosala kingdom became powerful. Okay, so gradually they were praising, they were had Indra and Varuna as their gods at the time, and then later on, and Vishnu, Shiva were actually there towards the end of the Vedas in the book 10 and book 1 has got, for example, Gayatri Mantra is in book 10. It is not a Puranic scripture. It is in Rig Veda. So towards the end of the Vedic period, a lot of these Hindu gods actually were in existence. Vishnu was there, Rudra was there, Brihaspati was there. And gradually when it started to move into the Gangetic plain and the Kosala kingdom and the Sri Rama kingdom became more prominent, and then Mahabharata occurred and Sri Krishna became more prominent. As it went towards the post-Vedic period and towards the Buddhism and Jainism became prominent. And once the Buddhism, Jainism started to decrease, that's when Krishna and Rama became more and more prominent. And as I was saying, the Indra was the main deity in northwest and western parts of India till about 3rd or 4th century AD. So Shatavahanas, so their royal deity was Indra. So Krishna and Rama came much later. So it is a gradual movement from the Vedic gods into the Puranic or the Mahabharata and Sri Ramayana gods.
Like when we are talking about Vedas, shouldn't we take a holistic view rather than just a subjective view of Rig Veda? Because the guy who actually gave us Vedas, Vyasa himself says, Veda Shastrat Param Nasti, and also adds, Nadaivam Keshavat Param. So, and also like if you go to earlier, like even before Ramayana Mahabharata, if you go to say Kathopanishads, that's where they say like Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam. I'm not saying like, okay, and also like in Gita also Krishna says, Vedaishcha Sarvaihi Ahameva Vedyo. So when it comes to Agni, Vayu, Varuna, whatever, it is actually denoting me alone. So shouldn't we take a holistic view even though we are going through the Vedas? Because it's when we talk about Hinduism or like Sanatana Dharma, the overall perspective is important rather than just going to a shloka and then subjectively dissecting only those shlokas.
I think you're right. I mean, the essence of Vedas is actually says that. I mean, he doesn't actually say anywhere that you have to pray to Indra only or Agni only or one particular god. I mean, Veda is Vedic. I'm talking about Rig Veda mainly because we are talking about Dashrajna. I mean, the Veda, all the 4 Vedas, and all the Brahmanas and Aranyakas have got lots to say about it, and including Puranas. Puranas, I'm using it as the king list. So it doesn't say anywhere that I know of where it says that you should only pray to a particular god, or should only use a particular, hymn to do a particular thing. I don't think so. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you have to take it as a holistic view for the entire Vedic scripture, not just the Rig Veda. I mean, you know very well, Rig Veda is the first part of the 4 Vedas. The other 3 Vedas are subjugated to the what it says in the Rig Veda. So they're all just explanations of the how and what should be done in the Rig Veda. So you are absolutely right. You have to take a holistic view, not sort of get stuck onto one aspect of it. I mean, we are talking about Dashrajna because this is, as Dr. Elst said, this is an event which has got a paramount importance and is pivotal in what happened afterwards. Not what happened at the battle, but what happened afterwards. So this is why she should be given the importance it deserves. That's what we are trying to say. We're not trying to say that you got to go and pray to Indra and he is the only god. No, that's not right. You are absolutely right. You have to take a holistic.
She says that the Archaeological Survey of India has discovered Pashupati seal in the Harappan site, which is considered to be a proto-Shiva. So what importance Shiva has in the Harappan period and Vedic period?
Hypothesis put forward by a few people and disproved by a few other people. At the same time, there are people who have actually said, why couldn't it be Indra? Because Indra is called the lord of cattle, a lot of animals. So why couldn't it be, if Pashupati could be Indra rather than Rudra? Because Rudra actually come towards the end of the Vedic period. And you're right, it's possible that is Rudra, that is Shiva. But without able to decipher the Indus Valley script, it's difficult to say what it means.
I just had a comment there, Dr. Kashyap. There is a speaker earlier, Dr. Mrugendra, not Dr. Acharya Mrugendra Vinodji. He had mentioned that the Pashupati seal is actually a Jajman is sitting for a yagya and, wearing all the headgear and all of that. So his interpretation is it is a Jajman is sitting for a yagya. We just wanted to put that out to you. I didn't have any question here at all. Thank you.
It's entirely possible. It looks like Ajamana. And in Yagna, you need to have an Ajamana Adipati, so he could be Ajamana. You're wearing all this headdress and starting his Yagna. Well, I would disagree with that.